Voices Radio.
Voices Radio. Voices as a radio.
Voices
Radio.
Radio.
Hello and welcome to I Was Just Wondering with me, Tom Salmon, the show that dives into music, film and games and everything else in between. And my guest on this week's show is the international writer and director, Lydia Rui. I've said that wrong, haven't I?
It's okay. It's Rui.
Yeah, okay. So for people who aren't familiar with your work as a filmmaker, who are you and what do you do?
Who am I? I am an Australian-Chinese writer and director by the name of Lydia Rui, as you said. I think I started off with documentary and then I moved into fiction. But I would like to say that my work kind of sits in between. Mm-hmm. I try to make cinematic work that still feels quite grounded and intimate. And the themes that I'm drawn towards tend to be the same. They tend to usually focus on identity, alienation versus belonging, or the pursuit of belonging, and the breaking of intergenerational trauma. Right. So today I've got 4 topics for us to sort of talk about, and this is a bit of a different episode. So the first topic is about inspirational mothers. I'd just like to start actually dedicating this show to my mother, Elizabeth Salmon, who sadly passed away actually last month, and she's the person who got me started on my creative journey and was my biggest supporter. So how was your relationship with your mother, and how has she influenced your creative journey so far? Well, thank you so much for that dedication, and I'm truly deeply sorry for your loss, and I would actually love to hear more about you talking about how your relationship with your mother.
Yeah. Well, we can definitely we can go back and forth.
Well, in terms of, for me, I think I have to thank my mother in terms of, she came from a very hard background, came from nothing, and when she did get to the UK on a scholarship, she only had £80 a month to live on, and so her career choices were informed by necessity. Yeah. And because of her hard work, I was able to have the opportunities that I did to pursue art, even though she, for example, when she first came to the UK, used to write poetry, but she chose to pursue computer science in the 80s because she knew that was a burgeoning field, and that she had to... She saw that there was new terrain to be explored by going there, and that she would be able to provide for her family, like her parents and her sisters, as well as her own family, our family later on. So I think she's greatly influenced me or helped me by being who she is, providing that background.
So whereabouts does your mother come from, and what was the sort of journey that she kind of made, just to sort of fill in that blank a little bit in terms of where, because you said that she came to the UK to sort of study, so you've kind of done a sort of a similar sort of journey, which we'll get into a little bit later. But I'm just sort of curious.
Well, I think my trajectory is just 1 inch compared to hers. I think she was 16 when she came here as one of 10 out of the whole of China that was given a scholarship grant to come. And she was originally studying linguistics, but her our family really didn't have anything. She was born in Chongqing in a weapons manufacturing facility.
Oh, wow.
That's where she grew up.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, in a factory setting, basically. And my grandfather was almost illiterate. He was, I think he finished school when he was 15, and my grandmother was a primary school teacher.
Okay, well, that's interesting in terms of where you grow up and the environment you grow up in, which does sort of shape your tastes. So I was just wondering, was there a particular moment as a child or teenager when you started to really appreciate your mother's taste in music, art and film? Is that something you could connect over?
Unfortunately, not really. Well, not unfortunately, because she still inspired me and informed me in many other ways. You know, her entrepreneurial spirit, I think, inspired me. But she and I didn't really grow up together because of her work.
Right.
And so I spent most of my childhood and all of my teenage years basically living in another country from her. So when we did see each other, it was much more about the practical side of things.
Right.
It wasn't until later on that I think, we kind of had deeper conversations.
Okay, yeah. So where were you living when you were living apart? Because I know, was it Singapore?
Yeah, so
right?
in Singapore, in Singapore, from the age of 13 to 17, I lived without my family. From 13 to 16, I was in a guardian home, and then 16 to 17, I was living with a primary school teacher.
Okay. So that's because I guess the thing is, it's not necessarily a great sort of like comparison, but it's almost being like not necessarily like an orphan per se, but you are under the care and guidance of somebody else, and you don't necessarily have that familial sort of like contact with a parent. And again, this is something we'll touch on again. This idea of like otherness, like not belonging, maybe being not. Should we say, like part of your sort of like surroundings and feeling like you're enmeshed as you would, sort of stuff you wouldn't even think about as being a child that sort of grows up with your parents and that kind of thing. So I guess it's like next question. I guess it's interesting, I guess, like, because we've talked about whether you connect over things. So I guess I can contrast to that. Did you have a rebellious phase as a teenager or a young adult? And I guess, were you exploring more provocative artists and filmmakers that perhaps not your mother or the people that were looking after you didn't approve of, perhaps?
It was funny because I think my whole teenage years and even just before, I was they were all rebellious. I think I got my first tattoo when I was like 13.
Wow, okay.
And I started, I feel like I had my rebellious phase quite young.
Right.
But I did, who has really influenced me when I was like in that period, I would return back to Australia for the summer often, and during that time, my mum would still be working, and we lived in a suburb that was quite far away from the city, so it would take like an hour and a half to get into the city. So I ended up usually just staying home. And I would go to local Blockbusters and rent out films, and one of the films that I rented out that really, really stayed with me and I feel like still influences me to this day is probably Perfect Blue by Satoshi Kon, which is quite a intense psycho thriller anime that I think I think that was probably quite pivotal. And I had a really lovely neighbor called Chappers who was older than me, and he kind of showed me all this kind of indie films and musicians as well, like Joy Division and stuff.
Oh, okay, right, yeah, definitely the darker edge of kind of things. But also like people dealing with like personal tragedy in a way that, because essentially like I guess something like Joy Division, yes, they're dealing with mental health issues and personal tragedy in a melancholic kind of way, opposed to somebody like a death metal group where it's just basically it's all iconography, it's all image, it's all, I guess, the more venal and visceral sort of side of things. At least there's more of a like personal connection to it rather than it just being just like bloods and snots, basically. I know from a previous conversation that you said you like work that focuses on the darkness, and part of it, your work sort of focuses on trauma, but through your work, it's coming to a place of, I don't know, maybe catharsis through that. And we actually did speak about Enter the Void and Melancholia as being two things that, I guess, like later on were things that you were interested in. Is there anything, can you think of anything like now, not necessarily like a film per se, but anything like now that's sort of like touched in like in a similar kind of way, I wonder, recently?
Well, in terms of films, I went to the Francis Bacon exhibit.
Oh, okay.
I think that was actually really, I could feel goosebumps when I went there, and that was really, you could see the texture in his darkness there and how he felt confined and was trying to live beyond that confinement as well, but it kind of being this pervasive feeling chasing him and being able to see it even in the animals around that projection, I think really spoke to me.
And I remember one of my favourite pictures actually is from like the Batman movie, which when I first saw it, but there's a very famous picture of the hanging meat with the guy with his like sunglasses and the little hat and stuff, and that's always sort of stuck with me. It's always been one of my favourite Francis Bacon pictures. And also just jumping on from that, I actually went to a Keith Cunningham exhibition at the Newport Street Gallery, who's actually he's actually an Australian artist who was very well regarded at a certain time, and he stepped away from fame, but he continued to paint. But it's sort of Bacon-esque. So I'd recommend sort of checking that out. It's in Lambeth and it's owned by Damien Hirst sort of gallery, so that's a good one to check out. So just like moving on. So we've spoken to each other before, 3 years ago in like 2019. So I'd just like to do a little recap. So you graduated from NYU Tisch School of the Arts. You worked as a videographer for Beyonce, and your short film This Perfect Day, which you made in 2018, had just screened at the Tribeca Film Festival. So what happened next in your creative journey?
Well, I actually made This Perfect Day as a little exercise with friends. It was very, very lo-fi. And I had actually made it as a submission for the NFTS. So I actually...
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I actually, whilst I was at Tribeca, got the notification that I was selected for an interview. And then soon after did the interview and over Zoom, which... I guess went well, and then I was selected, and then soon after that I was at NFTS.
Right.
Yeah.
And how did like COVID kind of affect that at all? I guess because even now like it's this weird sort of like fog where I'm trying to track where COVID actually started and it's still ongoing now, but kind of like finished in terms of like lockdown. And did that kind of like interrupt anything at all for you?
Definitely. So we began our NFTS degrees in January, the master's students anyway. We began in January, late January, and then the lockdown happened, was it March? And then March, April?
The first one, yeah.
And that completely shuttered everything, and nobody knew what was going to happen, how long it was going to go for. I think there were film schools in Germany, for example, that put indefinitely on hold their programs. And we just did everything via Zoom. And I think, I'm sure you've had this experience too, but at that time, everybody thought that because we were in our homes, we could just keep going with Zoom. So it would be like 10 to 6 nonstop Zoom. And I think people hadn't quite grasped the extent of screen fatigue yet, and Zoom fatigue that can happen.
Of course, yeah.
It's just like the darting of the eyes between lots of different faces and trying to register those expressions. And I think, we maybe lost out on some of the interdisciplinary nature of filmmaking that we had come there for, the networking and all this. But by the end of it, I think the school actually did an amazing job of providing COVID funds.
Right.
So we still, for the most part, got to make our films just with new restrictions in place. But again, there was like a COVID pot that the school provided.
Right.
That was really helpful.
And just to sort of backtrack a little bit, it's only 8 people that are actually selected for the MA in directing for fiction. Is that correct? So
for our year, I think for the year after me and onwards, it's now 10. It's been increased to 10, but for my year, it was 8.
And then I think from that 8, is it only a few of you actually get to make like full-length films, or do you all get to make films?
It's actually very democratic. I really like it because we all make films and we're all given the same amount of money and the same resources that the school offers in terms of facilities. So it's one of the reasons I really wanted to come here actually, because other film schools, they might give you a few grand to help you, but then other people with connections and other resources might be able to make, films with helicopters and Michelle Rodriguez. You know what I mean? It's just like it evened out the playing field, and it was really nice, I think, in that regard.
And I think it's sort of worth mentioning in terms of these sort of thesis films. They are highly involved. You sort of mentioned. Typically, how much does one cost, like ballpark figure, just so people have an idea of the kind of money that people spend on these projects?
So again, it's the school funds it completely. So we don't pay for them, but the school gave us I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but I think I can say the school gave us 18,000.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But we get a lot of in-kind favors as well, I think. And you have to be, I think so. We have equipment, for example. The school has its own equipment and really state-of-the-art facilities like color grading suites and sound mixing, dubbing theaters. So in a way, it's worth a lot more than the 18
Yeah, of
grand
course. Yeah.
the school gives.
So before this, as you say, like you had you'd done sort of filmmaking work, and I'm sure you could have easily found a job at a production company doing film-related things, or even like directing, jobs and stuff like this. So what was like the primary focus of like, right, I want to continue my education from doing like a bachelor's in art to like an MA, rather than going like, right, I'm going to go out and I'm going to see how I get on, in I guess like in the industry as such, basically.
To be honest, I didn't feel ready after this perfect day. I really feel like I made this perfect day as an exercise,
right?
As almost a scene, and I wanted to come to the NFTS for the freedom of exploring different sides of myself and also scaling up.
Yeah.
But in a kind of in a maybe trained way. I felt like I wanted to work on the musculature of the craft of directing,
right,
gradually to a point where I built my own confidence.
I see. So I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. What are the three biggest differences between studying filmmaking in New York, doing the Bachelor's of Fine Arts, and in London doing like the Masters of Arts? Is there I guess what I'm sort of alluding to is like the cultural differences of English style teaching versus American.
Oh, I think it's so hard to compare because at NYU I was, like you say, doing a bachelor's.
Yeah.
So we were all young and didn't know what we were doing necessarily.
Yeah.
I also came in as an internal transfer, so I didn't start off the bat doing film. And even whilst I was finishing film, I was still doing other general electives to fulfill my American degree. So it was not as discipline specific as the masters. Here I don't have to battle anyone for being a director. I'm very lucky to just be given the position of I am a director. Everybody else has chosen their fields with the same ardor and the same passion that I've chosen my field. And we're all working together to make the best film we possibly can in our fields with the same amount of passion, whereas I feel like at NYU in the undergrad program, lots of people were still figuring out what was their true niche.
Right. Okay. And so just following on from that, in the last interview that we did, at the very end of it, like actually off air, we spoke about your creative vision of filmmaking style as a director. So what's been the biggest influence inside, outside of filmmaking that you feel's really developed your directorial vision? I mean, you did talk about the musculature, I can't even say that word, musculature of directing. So what's really honed that for you, do you feel, between, I guess, like This Perfect Day and then going to like Virile, I guess?
Virile.
Sorry, Virile.
Yeah, I think for a respect for, like, honestly, for example, with This Perfect Day, I wrote it and directed. I wrote it very, very quickly. And then I also not only directed it, I also edited it. And then we only had 3 days to do the sound design, a couple of days to do the color grade. And the first assistant director, for example, that was his first job, being an AD. So it was very intimate and really just felt like an exercise for us. Whereas coming to the NFTS, you learn how to work, for example, in development with tutors and script developers who come and give you feedback, and not to be too precious, but at the same time retaining your integrity.
Right.
So how to kind of work with people who might be in executive positions, for example. You learn to work with just so many other disciplines that I'd never worked with before. Differentiating between a producer, a production manager, a production coordinator.
Right.
There's also an assistant directing course at NFTS, so I'd never had so many assistant directors who are all really lovely. I loved them all.
Yeah.
And we had Graham Hartstone, who had worked on Eyes Wide Shut and Blade Runner and all these films, helping us with the dialogue mixing, for example, and just having access to these facilities and. I think scaling up, managing people that, I think there were like something like 74 students that ended up working on Virile. So, and it wouldn't be that level of film, I think, without them.
Definitely. So just jumping into that, so can you remember the feeling or event that initially sparked the idea for that film when you were coming up at the NFTS for that particular one?
So also just on the last point, I just also wanted to say that it was so much about letting go a bit more and also allowing other departments to rise up. You can't see what I'm doing, but I'm like lifting my hands up and just like having their creative input in this way that I just, it was really, really delightful for me, and having a development process that I had never had before in that way. Sorry, so you were saying the seed of Virile. It came from a dream and also a feeling of queer erasure that I saw in very binaristic films, very heteronormative binaristic films. So, for example, a film like The Beguiled, I'm like, but what about the queer character in that? And I think my experience of feeling of a bit of a jealousy of like towards not being man enough.
Right. Okay. And just so the audience has a little bit of idea, could you just give like a short sort of synopsis of the film, just so as we continue our conversation, they kind of know what we're going to be talking about a little bit?
Yeah. So Virile is a psychosexual thriller at sea, following Beau, who is an androgynous deckhand on board a research vessel of otherwise all women. And they're having a clandestine affair with Dr. Rosen, who is the chief scientist, who is on a mission to potentially solve the global fertility crisis, which is plaguing the world in this post-apocalyptic setting.
And the thing that sort of like struck me was you did an Instagram post actually, and it always feels weird when I bring this up because it kind of feels like I'm stalking my guests, but it's not. It's basically sort of like research. But it was interesting because you posted about your mother and saying you're the similar age as she was when she had you, and obviously this is to do with pregnancy and this sort of stuff. And I just wondered if was it conscious, unconscious, these sort of feelings of sort of like motherhood, like exploration and this sort of thing that's we're feeding it to this particular point in your life, or am I reaching quite hard here to make a connection?
That's really interesting. I hadn't actually thought of that, but there is probably some kind of subconscious pressure that I feel where I'm dealing with my gender in a way, and then also feeling the pressure to have a nuclear family, maybe. Yeah. Maybe. Okay. I haven't processed that yet.
So in terms of the film's development at the NFTS and its other financial partners, did you have to negotiate with them to explore the film's more sexually explicit story elements, as you talk about like queerness, gender dysphoria, that kind of thing?
Surprisingly, they didn't try to censor me at all. They were very supportive of the whole process, and they said they've never made a film like this in their history.
Okay, right.
But they've not explored gender in this way or sexuality in this way. But they were actually very supportive.
Yeah.
I had a great script consultant who was with us called Angela McFarlane, and I think her presence really helped, as well as Ian Sellers, who was my tutor. I think they really supported me, even if perhaps other people didn't.
Okay, I see. Right.
Yeah.
And had you done a lot of like outside research and say like sexology and like queerness and I guess like in a more formal academic sort of like setting, or was this just your own sort of like personal experience you're kind of bringing to it through your own like personal exploration? Because obviously there's there's a huge history of sort of queer cinema that you can sort of investigate, and there's other like queer like events that you can kind of go to where you can interact with this community outside of just like reading a really thick book about it, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely came from my own feelings foremost, but then I would read some academic literature, some interviews. I've been reading Undoing Gender by Judith Butler,
Right.
and did go to the Trans Pride March, but beyond that, obviously, I also have trans friends, and Liv is non-binary.
Yeah.
Michelle from This Perfect Day is non-binary. And we also had a trans intimacy coordinator.
Right,
And,
right.
yeah, I think it's always things came from me from a personal place, but there's always educating to be doing.
Yeah.
And I'm very open to that always.
And just to sort of jump in a little bit into the casting process of Beau, played by Liv, how did that come about? Because she's the pivotal character. Sorry? Yeah. Apologies, because I know I made that mistake before. How did you go about
casting them?
Yeah.
I had a great casting director called Heather Baston.
Yeah.
And she actually put forth Liv. I think she selected about 20 to 30 performers or talents, and Liv just really stood out to both of us.
Okay.
They're an amazing academic, playwright, and performer in their own right. They've actually got a show coming out at Edinburgh Fringe.
Oh, okay, right.
Swarm,
Yeah.
And they're also directing their partner's show, Cats.
Right. Okay.
By Frankie Thompson.
And obviously, like, no spoilers, but I'm interested to learn a bit about the challenges of shooting this film on a research boat in the middle of the ocean. Did you encounter what kind of like production problems did you encounter while shooting the film? Because I understand that shooting at sea is quite arduous.
Yeah, it's a lot, because actually the red tape at school surrounding the health and safety element is very dense. So we had to make sure that everything was as safe as possible.
Yeah.
Obviously, financially, it was very challenging, but we were really lucky to have met various people who were able to help us for a very, very nominal fee. We actually ended up having to shoot on 4 different boats.
Oh, wow.
To
okay.
make it,
yeah.
we made 3 look like one, and then there was another one that was coming. That's the mysterious man's boat. And going out to sea, I think, was the hardest, because it took about 2 hours to get into the middle of the Solent.
Right.
And then we also wanted it to be magic hour, and the only time we can really do that is dawn, because it was a busy time.
Right. Yeah.
During the Solent, usually a lot of people there, it's just flooded with sailboats and, leisurely activities. And so we wanted to look isolated.
Yeah.
And then, so not only are we, traveling out to get that half an hour window of time, hoping that there's nobody else there, we're also trying to coordinate another boat coming towards our boat, and we're also getting the Alexa shot as well as getting the drone shot simultaneously.
Right.
Again, only having half an hour, and it was also a night shoot as well, so everybody was really tired.
Yeah.
But I think we got it in the end.
Yeah, you did.
So
yeah.
So it was. I think. Yeah, people tend to maybe underestimate how hard it is to get a shot coordinating 2 boats coming at each other.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot like walkie-talkies and making sure they're coming.
There's a lot of miscommunication. Chuggy pig.
I guess like about that, because you're quite a meticulous storyboarder. I know from your last film that you, as we sort of spoke, had a documentary feel, but it was meticulously sort of storyboarded. In the case of that, you said Letting Go, was this as meticulously storyboarded in terms of the sequences, or did you have to, I guess, like adjust more and be a bit more, I guess, like flexible? I don't know if that's the right word.
Yes, we still meticulously storyboarded, and we even incorporated photos from our recce as storyboards. So we kind of storyboarded, then did a recce, then took photos at the recce, and then used those photos in the storyboard. But that allowed us to then be flexible on. Then I would revisit those storyboards and redraft them and be like, oh, what. We can actually combine these shots into one shot, you know,
Right.
or we can lose this shot here. And I also would show them to Sean Pearson, our editor, and be like, what do you think?
Yeah.
Is there something that maybe we don't need, or maybe something we really do need to prioritize? And then that was also really helpful when we had Cordelia Hardy, Ariane Devaris, and Richard Lingard as our first ADs on different days. Because then we could communicate at shorthand. And we also had quite a limited amount of time that we could shoot, just because the tides would rise and fall, which means that we could only exit the gangplank at certain times.
Right.
The gangway. And we had to just be very, very, there was no going over time, basically.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
we had
yeah.
to be very, very diligent.
And just about there's one particular shot that's in there, and it's not really like a spoiler, but there's one bit where Bo is stretching out, and then there's like two circular like ports, and because it's to do with like female reproduction, it did sort of like strike me on a very sort of anatomical like level that I could see this sort of like symmetry. And I don't know if that was like obviously like intended or not, and I guess like you can read films in a many different sort of like ways, but it did, I thought it was an interesting sort of like parallel. I just wondered if that was like intentional or not, or I'm just again like reading too much into the
That's
into
amazing. I definitely did not design the boat that way, but that's very, that's funny that you say that. No, I hadn't even realized that.
Yeah, so just like sort
Films
of
are like Rorschach tests, I swear.
it could be, yeah. Like it's like what I'm seeing in there. So I just want to sort of move on to the score and the sound mix, which you sort of briefly spoke about before, which is very important to the film's claustrophobic atmosphere. So how did you technically convey the mood and tone that you wanted to achieve to the sound department? Because it sounds pretty tough in a way.
So I always create playlists
Right.
whenever I'm writing a film, and before we even shot, I sent that playlist to our composer Matilda Coachlin, and she actually wrote some draft cues, which were really, really helpful. We always talk about texture and feeling, and she sent me those draft cues, and that also helped me a bit with the shot listing.
Right.
Helped Lukash and I with the shot listing. And actually, likewise with Jan Sigworth, our sound designer, he sent me these amazing recordings of ice breaking in the Arctic.
Yeah.
And that just brought a mood into my mind and an atmosphere, and it helped me realize that sound can increase the production value of your film.
Yeah,
tenfold.
100%. Yeah.
You know, it just creates this world in this way that you can't visually capture. It just elevates things.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of how we communicate. It was a dialogue. And then when it comes to the post-production and we're actually in the thick of it,
Yeah.
I also like to kind of get my hands, not in there, but I just mean I like to be physically with the sound designer
Right.
as much as possible.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that process because I think I can be quite particular about sounds. They have
Right.
a real different effect on me.
Yeah.
It's like the same with color as well. I'm always there in the coloring process, in the color grading process, because I feel like I have like kind of a visceral reaction to
Right.
sounds. It's really hard to describe.
Yeah, no, I think I can understand. I guess, and I say in terms of like things you can control, I guess like sound and the sort of color grading is something you can definitely be very precise and exact
Yeah.
with, as well.
But I do think also we're really lucky with that. We just had similar taste
Right.
as well. So like Jan, for example, found this percussive sound for the engine
Yeah.
that is almost like a track as well. And I think that's just a taste thing as well.
Yeah.
You know, I think so we were quite aligned, so I wouldn't I would prefer always to work with people in which our tastes are aligned. You don't have to.
You're not fighting them.
Or struggling to
Yeah.
find that language.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
a intrinsic quality almost.
Yeah.
And also George Day did the percussion bits, some bits that Mathilde then chopped it and used to create that sound, but he was beating on like pipes and things like that.
Yeah. That's cool. And definitely like with Foley design, it can be all sorts of weird and wonderful objects that they use you wouldn't even think of. Like I think one of the famous ones is like celery is used for like snapping bones, I think, and all this sort of things you kind of just wouldn't think of. And the thing about sort of like sound and sound design is it's very subliminal as well. Like very like tonal shifts can just make you feel really uncomfortable, but you're not really actually aware that you're hearing something, which is quite interesting. So I just wanted to sort of sum up a little bit here. So I know from watching This Perfect Day in Virile, they're exploring themes of like queerness, androgyny, alienation, and the female gaze are central to your work as a writer, director. Why are these themes still important to you in like 2022?
I think they just always will be. I feel like they're kind of like the fabric or the DNA of my being. I feel like I can't really separate myself from my queerness or the feeling of alienation that I grew up with or the pursuit of belonging. I think that's going to be an engine in my work, but it doesn't necessarily dictate the subject matter.
Right, I see. Yeah, it does. Yeah. So that's definitely because I guess like in terms of like exploration, in terms of making this particular movie, is there anything like now that you feel because you've pushed in, I guess like further into this, is there anything that you can kind of see like beyond that you would like to explore even further? I mean, I know you're developing this into sort of a feature film, but is there anything like beyond this you kind of think that's still like, I guess like still to sort of like touch upon or like explore, I guess?
Sorry, you mean with Virile?
Yeah, well, like
or
just these themes, because I guess like as you push out in these different like themes and you explore, and I guess like through exploring these themes, you're getting a deeper understanding and appreciation of them. I just wonder, is there stuff that you can now you're more like aware of now that you can see you'd like would further like to explore? I guess is the question on.
I think I think I haven't done it justice. I think I've only explored them in a short form, which limits me. And I think I just really want to explore it in a long form, in a feature form, where I can show nuance and depth in all the different characters. Yeah. Rather than being so subjectively focused on just one character, and in terms of having more empathy for everyone in a way that comes across, you know, and exploring like a prism, just seeing everybody. Yeah. I just feel like I haven't been able to do that really yet.
Okay. And then sense. Just my final question on this particular topic is like, overall, what do you think is kind of like missing at the moment from, or what are the things that people are like, you feel like not talking about, or not sort of like exploring enough outside of your own work inside this sort of like arena, I guess?
I think that's, I think it's the intersectional quality that I'm interested in that I haven't really seen explored as much. Okay. In a post-national sense, that I'm somebody who, for example, has grown up across different countries. I don't feel like I really belong to any of them. Right. And to explore East Asian queerness in a way that isn't then confined within the nationality of that auteur as well. Yeah. And then also exploring how I guess there are like films exploring toxic masculinity and whatever the words are now. But I feel like that is something to be explored, how maybe men feel this pressure to perform a certain way and are trapped in their own way also.
Which is a nice sort of segue into my actual next topic, which is film and beyond. It's an interesting sort of segue. So my favourite blockbuster of like 2022 so far has been like Top Gun Maverick, which has grossed over $1 billion at the international box office. And I just like wonder, with that in mind, what are your thoughts and feeling in a film like that's overwhelming success? Do you have any?
Well, I think it is so successful because it speaks to both sides of the coin, like the men that it portrays probably really thrive watching that and feel like validation perhaps, I don't know, or some celebration. But then also on the other side of the coin, it's like people could go there. It's a cinema film, it's a community event that people could partake in potentially laughing at because it's so full. It's like pastiche. It's like it's so self-reflexive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't tell if it's parodying itself or not.
Yeah.
I think it is to an extent. But then also, the acrobatics of the fighter jets is very fun and immersive, and you need a certain amount of capital to be able to do those sequences, and then learning about the training as well. There's a whole narrative beyond the two-dimensional screen. But I think that's why it works, almost like in the way that satire works.
Right.
That it can draw in two poles. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's a very sort of simplistic movie, and I guess like people are hailing this as sort of return to old like Hollywood in a way. But I was actually watching an interview with Barry Norman, who a famous film critic, I should say, who reviewed the first like Top Gun, and he was very scathing about it. He said that this is very old-fashioned. It's like John Wayne would have made this film like 30 years ago, and that was in like 1986. So it's a weird polarity now that something that was poorly reviewed yet very successful is now being held as this masterpiece. A very simplistic like masterpiece, but a masterpiece no less of a sort of technical sort of storytelling, I guess, as you say. Like it's a very technical movie, and I guess irrespective of the rather rote sort of storyline, I guess the thing that I enjoy most about it is the technical brilliance of an actor like Tom Cruise, who's got 40 years worth of making movies. He could only make that movie because only he has done the preceding work that leads up to being able to
I know, that's why it's so ironic, this whole Uncle Tom is here to save the day still. All you youngsters think that you know better, but Uncle Tom.
And it's a weird dynamic, because I guess like when he was shouting and screaming, that famous audio clip on like Mission Impossible 7 or something, about being the gold standard for Hollywood filmmaking. And I guess this film, they say, has put an extra like $300 or $400 million onto the US box office. So I guess like the overall health of the industry, well, a part of the industry, does seem to be resting on a 60-year-old man that is not potentially in the next couple of years going to be able to shoulder that burden. And then what kind of happens to popular, to sort of film, or very popular sort of like filmmaking? Are we then just going to be it's just going to be like forever sort of Marvel movies, and there'll actually be no I guess like I struggle to say the word, but authorship in terms of like for better or worse. I guess there is Tom Cruise has a personality and has a charisma that is unique to himself. He's not playing a sort of superhero. It's not interchangeable, I guess.
I think I don't know. I'm not actually the kind of person who is drawn necessarily to Tom Cruise films. I feel like I'm the wrong audience.
It's a bit problematic, I guess, with his like personal life.
I'm not a Francophile or anything, but I think they do it right, where they kind of just in the afternoon go into the cinema by themselves and watch a little authored film. And, it's cultural soul nourishment.
Exactly. I think I'm a bit strange because I guess I can appreciate deeply art, like sort of non-narrative, atonal, sort of like movie making, and then like Hollywood filmmaking. So that moving on to like another fun question. So in our last interview, we briefly spoke about The Matrix and the possibility of a fourth Matrix film. Sadly, The Matrix Resurrections was a creative and financial failure. But let's just say You get a phone call tomorrow, and they say we want you to direct The Matrix 5 in like 2027. Do you have like a little bit of a elevator pitch? I guess is there anything? Would you make the avant-garde Matrix? I guess.
I actually feel like the first 3 Matrixes are so good that they stand on their own as a trilogy and they should not be touched. And I feel like, I would just be letting them down if I tried to do a 5th one. But if somebody did, I'd be like, why don't we just explore from another lens? Like, what about the Oracle's experience, the Matrix or something, like somebody else's entirely. I mean, what a burden that must be,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, to be the purveyor of truth and get people on the right path.
The Cassandra of the Matrix.
And I just wondered, do you have any thoughts and feelings about, because obviously the 4th one is like very, very referential and it's very meta to what came before. Do you have like a particular feeling about filmmaking that is very referential and very like meta? Is that something that, because I know that's not something that's particularly in your work, but is that something that you have a particular thought or feelings about?
I think Ruben Östlund does it quite well in The Square and Force Majeure. I don't know if that's what you mean.
Well, I mean, it's something in terms of like meta, in terms of it's very self-aware, in terms of like so in the 4th Matrix movie, for example, it's said that the Keanu Reeves' character is a game designer, and the first 3 movies were video games basically, and it sort of cannibalizes the content. Then you have something like the latest Thor movie. It's very referential. I guess I'm picking very sort of.
I watched Stranger Things recently for the first time,
that'd be another example,
and I thought that was actually really great. I really loved it. I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
And that's I guess that's an interesting thing, because they're picking a point in America where it's a high point essentially. During that particular point, it was seen, I guess, like culturally, like it was a real cultural force and like power. If you then start to move forward into sort of like the 90s and like 2000s, it seems to sort of drop off in terms of well, I remember for me when I was young, the reverence for America that I had of it being this land. And I guess like for me, that reverence, particularly what's going on with that country right now, is slowly like melting away. It's
absolutely
pulling itself apart at the seams. So it's interesting they picked that particular point.
I think, definitely America at that time, though, controlled media distribution in a way that other countries didn't, because the internet hadn't come about. So not to the extent that it has now, social media didn't exist. So I think it was able to monopolize this image of itself as a hero.
Precisely. Yeah. Okay, so my next sort of fun question is, which I'm going to bookend the last question by. So if Netflix called you up today and said they wanted you to write and direct a new 8-part psychodrama series, do you have any ideas, anything like you can kind of like pitch? In fact, even we could go back and forth. We can just spitball and work out something now.
Yeah, I definitely. It's funny that you say psychological dramas though, because I definitely feel like that is a part of my work that I enjoy. When I was when I was younger, I wrote a short about 3 identical triplets that break into a house. Yeah. And then it turns out the house owner blindfolds them and is this like mad scientist kind of person, traps them in a basement and switches their brains around and does these experiments on them. I think because I'd watched a lot of like Alex Gibney's human behavior experiments, those kinds of things. Which are great. But yeah, probably something along those lines. I don't know. That's the first thing that came to my head.
Good. I mean, I'm a twin, so I have a twin brother. It's not quite triplet. Yeah.
Wow.
And he recently
identical?
Yes. Well, fraternal. But if you saw us together, we look pretty identical. So he got married recently, and it's all this great thing of like when he was getting married, they thought that I was the groom. So there's this weird thing like I was getting married alongside with him, and now it's become this sort of like joke of when I meet his wife, my brother will joke with me and say like, oh, when you come in, Marie, don't kiss my brother, thinking that it's me, and it's this weird. Your identity is constantly being put into
comparison.
Comparison, also questioned. When I go to his work, they think that I'm my brother. In fact, I met my brother's boss, and he thought that I was him. So I could have been the evil twin and really messed up his career.
That's very trippy. See, like somebody trying to convince you that you're not who you are and that you're your brother.
Exactly,
who
yeah.
maybe you've forgotten. There's actually a great documentary which Tell Me Who I Am.
Yeah. And there's also
about that.
Dead Ringers, David Cronenberg. I guess that's dealing with like twins.
I love David Cronenberg.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Crimes of the Future though. I've heard mixed reviews.
I've heard. I've heard it. I mean, I'm on board, and I think sort of David Cronenberg, even if it's bad, at least he would have tried to swing for the fences and done something that's infinitely more interesting than, I guess, like watching something a bit more mainstream or not as even, or competently more well made, I would say. And then I just want to sort of like touch on a little bit. So, what's been your favourite film and TV show of 2022 so far?
Well, like I said, I've actually only just started watching Stranger Things.
Oh, so you're
and that was a
literally on the first
delight. Yeah,
season?
I've just finished the second. Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay, no
I'm
spoilers.
new.
Oh, okay, right.
But I really enjoy it, and I really love the world building. And again, it's like this synthesis of all these references, and is self-referential in the second season as well. When Luke is telling Max about what has just happened, and she's like, it's a bit predictable, but some story holes, but it's
precisely,
great.
yeah.
And then in terms of film, I watched Nina Thyberg's debut Pleasure,
Okay, right.
which took her 7 years to make, and it's all about this Swedish aspirational porn star who comes to the US.
Okay.
And it uses people who are actually in the porn industry as well, and it's funny and delightful and sensitively done and harrowing, and it's all of those things. It's really, really good.
So why did it take her 7 years to actually make the film? Was it getting funding, or was it just finding people who would be willing to...
I think it was the research.
Right,
The research, and getting it right and feeling ready for it. And I'm sure also the pandemic maybe scuppered things, potentially.
It kind of reminds me a little bit. Is it sort of similar to sort of Nymphomaniac in a sense that they're not superimposing actors' heads onto porn stars' bodies, that they literally are?
No, I don't. I've only seen volume 1 of Nymphomaniac, but it's nothing like that. It's very much nothing like that.
Right. I see. And I guess that's an interesting thing. Like in terms of like pornography, it's a lot more sort of pervasive, and it seems like a lot more acceptable in a way, I guess. In terms, I guess when I say acceptable, it seems there's a streak of conservatorship that runs through certain strands of the media and other sides where people are quite happy to explore that and be very open.
Well, I think the way that she did it, which was so interesting, is that she said that when she made her short film, which spawned this film, she was actually an anti-porn activist and actively campaigned against it.
Yeah.
And then as she progressed and did all this research over the 7 years, she came to be more empathetic with it and see it as a more nuanced industry. And also one of the nice things about it is that the protagonist isn't pathologized. She even makes a joke about how she's like, yeah, so I was raped and then I became a porn star. And she's like, actually, I'm just joking. It's like, she's just who she is. She seems to have a loving relationship with her mother. You don't actually know really anything about her life pre-arriving in America. And it's just about her pursuit. It's just about the game, really, and how you do see how soul destroying that game is.
Yeah.
It's certainly not glamorizing.
No, and I also think, like, in terms of the porn industry, I think, and it's a sort of hard thing to sort of, something I sort of wrestle with. There are certain, I guess, like, industries or things where people that can't function, per se, in, like, office jobs or, like, normal, they can't handle, like, a 9 to 5. Where are these people supposed to make money? Where are they supposed to find, like, community? And as much as, sort of, like, exploitative as it is, and there's some very, very steep pitfalls of that, I guess, like, some people do find a community and do find solace and a place of belonging for a period of time, I guess, because there's people that have been, I guess, like porn stars have been very happy to have a very illustrious career. They've been very smart. They've made their money and they've moved on. There's people that's been destroyed. There's people that become born again Christians, because I guess like as we move through life, our personality changes, our perspective changes, our values sort of like change.
Exactly.
So yeah, it is a very it's a very difficult and, as you say, like nuanced subject. So I just want to move on and ask you a question I asked you at the end of our last interview, and I wonder if the answer is still going to be the same. So what's your dream project if money and time wasn't an issue?
Did I say last time, like, a grounded, dark version of his Dark Materials?
You did, the Golden Compass. I've got that down there.
God, I haven't
got that one.
changed.
Interestingly, you spoke about multiverse stories, and I know that everything
Everywhere All at
Once. And I was like, oh yeah, that just like popped up. So you're very prescient about that.
Yeah, that was a great film. Absolutely wacko, but great.
Yeah, the Daniels are fantastic. Like Swiss Army Man, I really enjoyed that movie. So
I didn't see that one, but it really reminded me of all their music videos, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah. So it's still the same. So it's like Golden Compass. And the other thing you mentioned was a big sci-fi project which dealt with alienation, belonging, and outsiders.
Did I say that?
You did say that, yeah.
I said that.
Yeah.
In 2019.
In 2019, 2019, you said that, yeah.
Wow, that's nuts.
So there's not at the moment, there's nothing on your desktop where you're writing this 300-page sort of like sci-fi.
No, but that's what I'm doing with Virile.
Oh yeah, correct. Yes, precisely. Yeah. I mean, I did think that, but then I thought that might be the connection might be too sort of like close. But yeah, it's interesting when you ask these sort of questions, you follow up in terms of where somebody's thought process was then to where they kind of like end up.
That's because I've completely forgotten. I wouldn't have even thought I would have answered that. But that's really actually affirming to hear, because I feel like my work is so disparate sometimes. I envy those directors that seem to just do one thing over and over and over again. Because they're like honing their craft. It's like transcendental cinema is the act of ritualizing behavior and just like Ozu, just
of course,
the same thing in a way over and over again. And achieving transcendence through that, and I don't have that. I feel like I'm very varied, and so it's kind of nice to hear that I answered the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing you said is like all my projects are dream projects because I hope they get made. Was like your other.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's me like mining for the secret project eventually, like down the line, to get that real like exclusive. I guess like what's interesting, I guess briefly, we haven't really touched on it because we've spoken about those Virile and This Perfect Day, but you have made a couple of other movies in between that, I believe. We've just got a few moments. Do you want to just sort of briefly mention those? Because you said your work has been quite disparate. So what are those movies you made? What are they sort of like focused on?
So Gnome and the Worm is a film starring Afi Okeja, who was in one of the Friends in Rocks. But that film is about a girl who is best friends with the earthworm.
Right, yeah,
and she lives in a small holding, a secluded small holding with her parents. And her relationship with this worm is challenged when her mother announces that she's leaving. And so the actual concept of a girl who is super alienated and in love with an earthworm came from Lily Sariki. And then my task was to flesh it out, write it into a story, and then direct it. But in a way, it actually is still, I think I was drawn to that initial idea in the first place because of this concept of alienation and these prisons that we build for ourselves, that we encase ourselves in, and then how to, break out of that. And the earthworm is a metaphor, and also quite a phallic one, I suppose.
True.
Yeah. And then in the film Prom Night, that was just a little COVID exercise. Basically, it was just like right after lockdown, and we have one day to build a set and then one day to film it. And I street cast Diane Gray, who's working in our local Sainsbury's.
Right.
She'd also never been on screen before. And that was exploring the feeling that I had growing up of wanting to be white, because I was like Asian, growing up in Australia and with Western media, and just feeling that I wasn't good enough, and trying to Westernize myself.
Okay.
I think it was like a little experimental film played at MIF.
Right. Nice. Okay. So, lastly, where can people check out your work as a filmmaker, find out about your up-and-coming film projects, and follow you on social media?
They can follow me on Instagram at Lydia Rui Huang, which is LYDIARUIHUANG, and my website is just www.lydiarui.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on again and being interviewed by me. I really appreciate it. It's been
my
such a lovely
pleasure.
conversation. So
It's been
Yeah.
so rewarding. Thank
Brilliant.
you so
Right,
much.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Right.